The transport's artificial gravity flickered just enough to make Thomas Rodriguez's stomach lurch. He clenched the armrests of his seat, knuckles white, as the recycled air carried the faint tang of antiseptic and stale sweat. 15 years. 15 years since Operation Stepping Stones had turned humanity's slow crawl into the stars into something resembling a sprint. Theta Delta and Sigma Zeta were already bustling colonies, practically old news now. Theta Delta, a 2-month hop from Earth, had its own parliament and a thriving robotics sector. Sigma Zeta, 3 months further out, was a maze of asteroid tunnels humming with zero-G foundries. But Thomas wasn't headed to either of those. His destination was Alpha 1, a lonely station orbiting a star without planets, a full year from home. The 4th colony. The Edge. The transport shuddered again, and Thomas swallowed hard, staring at the smudged window where the warp field distorted the stars into streaks of blue. The SS Cape Town settled into Alpha 1's docking clamps with a hiss of maglocks and the groan of aging stabilizers. Yenner ran a gloved hand along the Scorpius glass freighter's bulkhead as she walked toward the airlock, part affectionate pat, part diagnostic check. The old girl had held together, just like she always did. Inside the hold, crates from Theta Delta Two's robotics workshops, Sigma Zeta's mind alloys, and, her lips quirked, Regulus Omega's infamous gourmet rations, which tasted like despair, but the colonists kept ordering them. She tapped her wrist calm, pulling up the manifest. Let's see, 50 kilos of polymer actuators, 20 crates of selenium diodes, and, oh, fantastic, another pallet of Omega's finest mystery meat, she snorted. Hope someone brought hot sauce. The station's docking officer would be here soon, clutching their pad and their patience in equal measure. Time to make this official. She cracked her neck and reached for the cargo seals. The docking bay's flickering overheads cast harsh shadows across Illyria's face as she adjusted the unfamiliar weight of the tool belt slung low on her hips. The buzz cut was still a shock every time she caught her reflection. No silver cascade, no crown, just bare nape and the faintest scar from a childhood duel near her temple. A vulgar little thrill ran through her at the anonymity. No bowing functionaries here. No petitioners whining about grain tariffs or irrigation disputes. Just the metallic bite of recycled air and the distant clang of cargo handlers. She exhaled through her nose, rolling her shoulders under the scratchy coverall. William would laugh if he saw her now. Her consort had always teased her about her incognito whims. But he'd understand. 5 centuries of governance required respites. Alpha 1 was ideal. Far enough from Eldora that no one would recognize their queen, close enough to the trade lanes that the gossip might still be entertaining. Gyra had pouted when she left, Devon clinging to her leg with theatrical despair. "Bring me a comet," he'd demanded. She'd flicked his forehead. "If you finish your arithmetic." A hydraulic whine drew her attention, someone cycling the Cape Town's airlock. Illyria tucked her hands into her pockets and leaned against a crate, watching. Time to see what this edge of civilization had to offer. The moment the transport's airlock hissed open, Thomas lurched forward. Not with the practiced stride of a spacer, but with the desperate stumble of a man who'd spent 2 months in zero-G purgatory. His boots hit the station's deck plating, and he collapsed to his knees so hard the impact rattled his teeth. "Thank Christ," he gasped, palms flat against the cold metal. He pressed his forehead to the ground, inhaling the sharp scent of industrial cleaner like it was incense. No more warp tremors. No more vertigo-inducing flickers in the gravity plating, just glorious, unflinching solidity. A child in a jumpsuit gawked at him. The mother yanked her away, muttering about colonist eccentricities. Thomas didn't care. He kissed the deck, actually kissed it, then barked a laugh. "Shoulda done this weeks ago," he announced to no one in particular. Standing, he scrubbed a hand over his buzz cut. The docking bay stretched before him, a maze of crates and flickering work lights. His berth assignment was tucked into his pocket, crumpled from his death grip during landing. Exile or not, this was home now. He grinned. Better than a faveless cell, he muttered, and set off into the station's belly. The docking bay's cavernous ceiling arched high enough to make even Illyria crane her neck, far grander than the cramped orbital platforms circling Earth. She let out a slow breath, fingers tightening around the edge of the crate she leaned against. This was no slap-together human outpost. The ribbed metal walls bore the telltale geometric etchings of Iorian engineering, their once pristine surfaces now streaked with carbon scoring and patchwork human welds. A freight drone whirred past, its repulsors humming as it navigated the labyrinth of stacked containers. Beyond, through the bay's open blast doors, she caught glimpses of a promenade. Neon signs flickering to life, a noodle vendor's steam curling into the rafters, a group of miners laughing over synth beers. The noise of it, clattering machinery, half a dozen languages, the thrum of life, settled against her skin like static. 6,000 souls, and this was just the converted section. She suppressed a smirk. Humans? Give them a derelict prison hulk, and within a decade, they'd turn it into a bazaar. By the time they finished gutting the lower levels, Alpha 1 would dwarf Eldora's capital. A twinge of something prickled behind her ribs. Not jealousy, anticipation. She pushed off the crate, rolling her shoulders. "Let's see what chaos you've brought with you, Cape Town," she murmured, and strode toward the airlock. Yenna watched the docking officer retreat into the station's labyrinthine corridors, their boots clicking against the deck plates with bureaucratic finality. She thumbed through the freshly stamped manifest on her wrist, calm, Yenna Chorden, Captain. The title still tasted faintly absurd, like chewing on a ration bar labeled filet mignon. Her crew's names scrolled past. Yuma and Birat in medical, Mona handling bioscans, and covertly running a betting pool on who'd sprain something first. Amara, ever the stickler, had insisted on being listed as first officer and ship's lawyer, as if the Cape Town needed a legal expert for hauling scrap and dodging customs. The engineers, Alice, Chloe, Ganiu, were already elbow-deep in the starboard nacelle, arguing over torque calibrations in 3 different languages. And then there was her. Illyria's alias, Lyria Wren, sat innocuously between Yua and Zara in security. Yenna snorted. As if anyone aboard didn't know exactly who she was. The disguise was flimsy, but Alpha 1's administrators wouldn't care so long as the cargo manifests balanced. She tapped the comm. "Cargo's clear. We've got 48 hours before the next haul. Try not to start a war." A pause. Amara. The security team, Yua, Zara, Yvette, were already loitering near the promenade arch, eyeing the noodle vendor like wolves circling a campfire. Yenna pocketed the manifest. Time to see what passed for fun on the edge of known space. The quarters smelled faintly of ozone and industrial solvent, standard for freshly pressurized station compartments. Thomas ran a calloused thumb along the alcove bed's padded rim, testing the give. Not luxury, but softer than the prison cot he'd slept on back in Sao Paulo. His duffel landed with a thump. The zipper snarled open, revealing his meager possessions. The Barber Kit's leather wrap, stitched by his sister before the riots. Monte Cristo's dog-eared pages, smuggled into the transport by a sympathetic guard. And Grandpa Emmanuel's fob watch, still ticking after 60 years. Its brass casing dulled by generations of Rodriguez palms. The drawers slid out silently, left for clothes, right for future books. The watch deserved better than a drawer. He wedged it into the display niche above the desk, angling it to catch the overhead light. Kit on the desk. One razor out, balanced across his knuckles, old habit. The blade caught the glow of the Mark 17 standby indicator. Thomas grinned. Home. The supermarket's automatic doors wheezed open, releasing a gust of chilled air that smelled faintly of hydroponic greens and recycled plastic. Thomas rolled his shoulders, still stiff from the transport, and grabbed a basket. Earthfleet's advance payment had cleared before he'd even left Theta Delta. 400 credits, which meant real coffee beans instead of synth paste, Actual eggs, refrigerated, not powdered. And his fingers closed around a bottle of cachaça with a grin, proper liquor. The barber gig had its perks. He tossed in toilet paper, shampoo that promised forest freshness, whatever that meant, and a brick of laundry soap. The laundromat could wait. Right now, his priorities were simple: stock the kitchenette, crack open that bottle, and not think about Earth for at least 12 hours. A shelf of spices caught his eye. Paprika, oregano. His mother's old recipe for feijoada might just work here. He pocketed them, humming. The noodle shop's broth had been passable, better than Omega's mystery rations, at least. But Amara's chopsticks froze halfway to her lips. Across the promenade, through the shifting crowd, a flash of white fur. Not just any lichen. The familiar slope of shoulders, the way he carried his weight slightly forward, like a boxer even in civilian clothes. She dropped a cred stick on the counter and was moving before the vendor could protest, her tray abandoned. The crowd parted instinctively. 300 years hadn't dulled the presence of a white fang in motion. The scent hit her next: old leather, gun oil, and the faint musk of home. He slipped into the rusty airlock like a shadow. The bar's neon sign buzzed ominously, its blue glow washing over a dozen species hunched over drinks and dice games. Amara shouldered through the door in time to see her father lean over a poker table, his ears twitching at the clink of Reginald Raggle's prosthetic talons tapping a losing hand. "Papa." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. Reginald's crest flared, Zaver surprise, but her father just turned, slow as a glacier, his golden eyes crinkling. "Little star, thought you were docking tomorrow." She folded her arms. "And I thought you were retired." He shrugged, nodding at Reginald. "Your mother sent me, again." The Zaver groaned, slumping over his cards. Someone's got to save the homeworld from his gambling. Amara pinched the bridge of her snout. "It's a moon, Papa." "And yet," he said, plucking a credit chip from Reginald's dwindling pile, "it's still more than he's got left." The cards in Thomas's hand were good, damn good, but he kept his face as blank as a bulkhead. The table's overhead light flickered, casting shadows over Reginald's iridescent scales. The Zaver's left claw tapped a staccato rhythm against his pile of credit chips, the prosthetic servos whining under the strain. Thomas had started this game with 14 players. 12 were now leaning against the bar, nursing synth whiskey and bruised egos. Only the lichen patriarch and this overconfident gambler remained. He flicked his gaze to the coupon Reginald had tossed onto the pile. "Raggle," he read aloud, turning the flimsy plastipaper between his fingers. The name meant nothing to him, but the way Amara's father's claws extended, just a fraction, told him everything. Reginald hissed through his nasal slits. "Family heirloom, very valuable." Thomas dropped the coupon back onto the pile like it was radioactive. "Uh-huh," he nudged his own chips forward. "Call." The lichen's growl rattled the glasses on the table. Reginald's crest flared crimson, Zaver embarrassment, but Thomas just leaned back, crossing his arms. "Show him." Reginald flipped his cards, a pair of sevens. Thomas let the silence stretch for 3 heartbeats before revealing his full house. The bar erupted, Reginald's crest deflated. Amara's father exhaled through his nose. "Thank the moons," he muttered. Thomas scooped up the chips, leaving the coupon untouched. "Never bet what you can't afford to lose, amigo." Then the coupon burst into green flame. Barra had just taken a triumphant bite of her tuna sandwich. The station's replicator had finally gotten the seasoning right, when the tabletop under her elbow began to glow. Not the gentle flicker of a faulty holo display, but an eerie, pulsing blue that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She leaned back just as the air above it shimmered like a heat mirage. A pop, a curl of sulfur-scented smoke, and suddenly there was a sheet of parchment lying innocently between her plate and half-empty synth lemonade. She wiped mayo from her lips with one hand and picked up the document with the other. The paper was thick, slightly waxy, and covered in ornate calligraphy that wouldn't have looked out of place in a museum, or a particularly pretentious wedding invitation. Pledged and sworn, the hand of Barra Raggle, to be claimed by Thomas Rodriguez, as decreed by the loser's oath of Reginald Raggle, witnessed under the 3 moons. Barra's sandwich hit the plate with a wet plop. "Oh, you didn't," she hissed. Around her, the promenade's chatter continued, oblivious. The parchment trembled in her grip. She knew that legal phrasing, knew it intimately. It was a Xaver marriage contract. The kind drunken uncles used to settle bar tabs back home. The kind nobody took seriously unless you were Reginald fucking Raggle and had apparently decided to wager his only daughter in a poker game. Barra was on her feet before she'd fully processed the rage crackling in her veins. The parchment went into her pocket. The sandwich, abandoned. She had a father to hunt. Oh no. The words left Amara's muzzle in perfect, horrified unison with her father's gravelly groan. Her ears flattened against her skull as she stared at the last wisps of green smoke curling from the table. A green flame contract. The kind Xaver elders used to settle territorial disputes. The kind that couldn't be undone without a full tribunal, and even then, only if both parties agreed. She whirled on Thomas, her claws digging into the table's edge. "You picked it up," she hissed, as if he'd just activated a warp core breach with his bare hands. Thomas blinked, his fingers still hovering over the scattered chips. Yeah, it had a lady's name on it." Her father exhaled sharply through his nose, rubbing his temples. "Humans," he muttered, like it explained everything. A chair screeched behind them. Reginald was already halfway to the exit, his crest flushing a panicked magenta. Amara bared her teeth. "Barra's going to skin him." "And I'll hold him down while she does," her father growled, cracking his knuckles. Then the bar's ambient noise dipped. The unmistakable click of Xaver boots, methodical, unhurried, echoed from the corridor outside. Amara's tail went rigid. Too late. The footsteps stopped at the threshold. Thomas felt his stomach drop like a faulty grav plate. The Xaver woman, Barra, advanced on Reginald with the lethal precision of a plasma torch cutting through hull plating. Her fingers flexed, the tips of her claws gleaming under the bars, sickly neon. Reginald's crest had gone completely flat against his skull, his backpedaling steps faltering as his tail bumped against the poker table. "Father," Barra said, sweet as a warp core breach, "you have some explaining to do." Reginald's grin could have charmed a Klingon out of his disruptor. "Barra, sweetheart, what brings you to this?" He glanced at the rusty airlock's flickering sign, "Lovely establishment." Thomas's brain finally caught up with his panic. The coupon, the flames, the way Amara and her father were now watching him with identical expressions of pity. "Oh no," he muttered, scrubbing a hand over his face. "It was a wedding certificate, and I accepted the bet by picking it up, didn't I?" The lichens answered in eerie unison. "Yep." Reginald's elbow knocked over a synth whiskey. The glass shattered. Nobody moved. Thomas exhaled through his nose. "He's going to die," he observed, watching Barra's claws twitch, "and it won't be pretty." As if on cue, Reginald's retreat ended abruptly against the bar's dented counter. Nowhere left to run. Barra's claws scraped against the bar's pitted metal surface, carving thin grooves as she leaned in. The scent of Reginald's panic, sharp and citrusy, filled her nostrils. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Give me one reason," she murmured, her voice a velvet-trapped blade, "not to kill you with my bare hands. Right here, right now." Reginald's throat worked, his crest flushing a mortified violet. "Honey," he wheezed, patting the air between them like he could physically push back her rage, "it's just a formality. A silly little." "Not it isn't." Thomas and the White Fangs barked in perfect, damning unison. Thomas rubbed the back of his neck, grimacing. Human officials tend to be real strict about these things. Like 3 forms of ID and a blood test strict. Barra's tail lashed. "Try again, daddy dearest." The endearment dripped venom. Reginald swallowed hard, because, 20 years in jail for murder is a rubbish way to start a marriage. Her claws retracted with an audible snick. Or end one, she agreed sweetly. The silence stretched. Then, thunk. Her fist buried itself in the wall beside Reginald's head, punching clean through the faux wood paneling. Splinters rained onto his shoulders. She leaned closer, her breath stirring his nasal slits. "Next time you feel like gambling away your only child," she whispered, "remember this moment. And run faster." She yanked her hand free, flicking debris from her knuckles, and turned to Thomas. We need to talk." Thomas shut the door behind them, the latch clicking with finality. His quarters were cramped, just the alcove bed, a single chair wedged under the desk, and the niche where Grandpa Emanuel's watch gleamed. He gestured to the chair, then perched on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees. Bara sat, her tail curling around the chair's legs like a possessive vine. She didn't speak, just watched him, her pupils thin slits in the dim light. He exhaled through his nose. "Look," he said, rubbing his jaw, "I'm not gonna oblige you to anything. We can make it a paper marriage. A box to tick during tax season and nothing more." He met her gaze, holding up his palms. "We part ways and never meet again. Clean break." A beat, then her claws tapped against the chair's armrest. Once, twice. Thomas braced for the explosion. Instead, Bara leaned forward, her smile slow and razor-edged. "Oh, Thomas," she purred, "you think it's that easy." His stomach dropped. She flicked the contract onto the desk. The parchment crackled, its edges still faintly smoldering. "Green flame isn't just paper. It's alive. And it likes you." Her grin widened. "You're stuck with me, husband." Thomas groaned, flopping back onto the bed. "Fantastic." The door hissed open with the telltale chunk of a black market override, its servos groaning in protest. Yenna stood silhouetted in the corridor's harsh light, her shoulders rigid, her breathing sharp enough to flay skin. The scene before her, Thomas sprawled on the bed, Bara leaning forward with that razor smile, only stoked the fury crackling in her veins. "You!" The word tore from her throat like shrapnel. She was across the room in 3 strides, her fingers locking around Thomas's windpipe before he could blink. His startled wheeze was satisfying. "You stole one of my crew." The pressure increased, her thumbs digging into the hollow of his throat, his carotid hammered against her palms. "That contract's worth less than the air you're wasting. Die." Bara's claws pricked the back of her hand, a warning, not quite deep enough to draw blood. "Romulan," she said, eerily calm, unclench. Yenna bared her teeth but didn't loosen her grip. "He took you." "And I," Bara murmured, leaning in until her breath ghosted over Yenna's ear, "am right here." Thomas's face was turning an interesting shade of purple. Zara's boots pounded against the deck plating, her breath coming in sharp bursts as she sprinted through the station's winding corridors. The clang of her footsteps echoed like a warning siren. She skidded around the final corner, her muscular frame nearly colliding with the doorframe as she barreled into Thomas's quarters. The door hung open, its mechanism still sparking from Yenna's brutal override. Her emerald green eyes locked onto the scene. Yenna's fingers clenched around Thomas's throat, his face purpling, Bara's claws pricking the Romulan's knuckles. "No, no, no," Zara barked, her voice booming like a stun grenade. She lunged forward, her biceps flexing as she wrapped one arm around Yenna's waist and yanked her backward with enough force to send them both stumbling into the wall. Thomas collapsed onto the bed, gasping, his hands flying to his bruised windpipe. Yenna snarled, her sharp Romulan features twisting in fury. "Let go." "Captain," Zara growled, tightening her grip, her tone dropping into something low and urgent. "You need him. The Cape Town needs him, and you can't fly that bucket of bolts from the brig." She jerked her chin toward Thomas, who was wheezing like a broken ventilator. "Look at him. He's not worth the paperwork." Yenna's muscles tensed, her rage a live wire under Zara's grip, but she didn't lunge again. Bara, still perched on the chair, flicked a claw toward the door. "Now who's wasting air?" Zara didn't smile, but her grip eased just a fraction. The door slid open properly this time with the smooth whisper of hydraulics. Illyria stood framed in the threshold, her borrowed crew coveralls hanging just a little too loose on her curves, the fabric straining where she'd hastily stitched the seams to accommodate her hips. The disguise was serviceable, if unflattering. A slow, feline smile curled her lips as she surveyed the chaos. Yenna pinned against the wall by Zara's bulk, Thomas massaging his throat, Baraz still perched like a satisfied predator. "Well," she drawled, stepping inside with the lazy grace of a queen surveying a freshly conquered throne room. "This is interesting." Her fingers toyed with the hem of her sleeve, where a loose thread threatened to unravel. "Normally, it's either me or Amara who starts the interstellar incident." Her gaze drifted to Thomas, still flushed and breathless on the bed. A hum of approval vibrated in her throat. "On the bright side," she mused, tilting her head, "at least he's cute." The room held its breath. Illyria's smile sharpened. "Now, who do I thank for this delightful mess?" Zara exhaled sharply through her nose, her grip on Yenna loosening just enough to turn her head toward the door. The muffled thud of boots and the occasional yelp of protest echoed from the corridor. She smirked, her tusks glinting under the overhead lights. "Your timing's impeccable, Your Majesty," she said, nodding toward Illyria. "Reginald's getting a scenic tour of Zaver justice right now." A particularly loud thump reverberated through the bulkhead, followed by Amara's father's gruff, "Move your tail, you overgrown lug." Zara's grin widened. "Amara and the old man are dragging him to a shuttle. Tribunals in 3 days, plenty of time for Baraz ants to welcome him home." She finally released Yenna, stepping back just far enough to block any sudden lunges. Her arms crossed over her chest, the fabric of her uniform straining over her biceps. "And before you ask, Captain, no, you can't watch. Federation regs and all that." Baraz's tail twitched. "Pity." Yenna's nostrils flared, but the murderous tension in her shoulders eased, just a fraction. The station intercom crackled to life. "All personnel," droned a bored voice. "Shuttle bay lockdown in T-5 minutes for family dispute resolution." Zara rolled her eyes. Took them long enough. The door hissed, shut behind the last of their unwanted audience. Yenna's muttered Romulan curses fading into the corridor. Zara's booming laugh cut off by the closing mechanism. Bira exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since she'd stormed into that God's-forsaken bar. The contract still smoldered on the desk, its emerald edges pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Thomas slumped against the bulkhead, rubbing his throat. His voice came out rough. "So," he eyed the contract, then her. "Now what?" Baraz's grin was all teeth as she closed the distance between them. Her claws traced the line of his jaw, not quite a threat, not quite a caress. "Now," she purred, "we get to the good part." Before he could ask, before he could think, she fisted a hand in his shirt and kissed him. Hard. The contract flared to life behind them, its glow painting the walls in lurid green. Thomas made a sound halfway between a gasp and a groan. Bira didn't let go. The morning light filtered through the cheap polymer blinds, painting stripes across Thomas's bare chest, and the impressive collection of bruises blooming along his collarbone. He winced as he stretched, the memories of last night flickering behind his eyelids like a holovid stuck on replay. Baraz's claws raking down his back, the way she'd laughed when he'd pinned her wrists to the bulkhead, the sound she'd made when. A soft thud from the kitchenette snapped him back to reality. He turned his head just in time to see Bara balancing a tray of synth eggs one-handed while using her tail to flick the coffee dispenser's lever. The domesticity of it hit him like a stun baton to the ribs. His fingers traced the edge of the blanket absently, his mind spiraling. 3 of them? Could he even keep a kid alive, let alone raise one? He'd barely kept himself alive in the slums. Baraz's voice cut through his thoughts like a vibroblade. "Stop thinking so loud," she said, nudging the tray onto the nightstand. Her smirk was all sharp edges. You'll scare the hypothetical baby. Thomas groaned into his palms. Biraz's claws tapped his temple, gentle for once. Relax, she murmured. You're not completely hopeless. He peeked through his fingers. That's not reassuring. Her grin widened. Good. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of stolen moments. Biraz's tail curling around his wrist under the mess hall table. Thomas tracing the curve of her fangs with his thumb when no one was looking, the way she'd press him into alcoves between shifts just to hear him groan. But the station's chrono ticked onward, relentless. By the time they reached the docking bay, the Cape Town's engines were already humming, its cargo ramp groaning under the weight of last-minute supplies. Yenna stood at the top, arms crossed, her glare softening just a fraction when Biraz pressed a chit into Thomas's palm, a private calm frequency scrawled in hurried script. Biraz didn't say goodbye, just nipped his earlobe hard enough to sting and whispered, "Don't die before I get back." Then she was gone, her boots echoing up the ramp. The ship sealed shut behind her with a hiss of finality. Thomas stood there long after the Cape Town had jumped to warp, the chit digging into his palm. Somewhere in the mess of cables and coolant stains underfoot, the green flame contract pulsed once, faintly, and fell still. The air in Eldora Prime's throne room smelled of scorched marble and ionized plasma, again. William McKinley dove behind a toppled column, his pulse rifle spitting crimson bolts toward the gilded archway where Tazar's mercenaries kept pouring through. The kid had style, he'd give him that. Same emerald-trimmed armor as his traitorous father, same theatrical flair when ordering his men to cleanse the usurper's stain. A bolt grazed William's shoulder, searing through his jacket. He hissed, rolling to avoid the next volley. 15 years, he thought bitterly. 15 years of peace, and here he was, back in the same damn throne room, fighting the same damn family. Some dynasties just didn't know when to quit. Outside the shattered stained glass windows, the Orion's Hope hovered like a vengeful shadow, its ventral cannons glowing ominously. Gyra's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Stop being heroic and beam up already." William grinned, popping up just long enough to nail a mercenary between the eyes. "Where's the fun in that?" The ceiling exploded. Tazar descended on repulsor boots, his twin vibroswords humming. "McKinley," he roared, blades crossing in challenge, "you stole my aunt's heart." William shot him in the throat. The kid crumpled midair, his boots sputtering before they crashed into the mosaic floor. William ejected the spent cartridge, and her favorite wine cellar, worth it. The comms erupted in Devon's laughter. The biobed's restraints dug into William's wrists as the Orion's Hope banked hard, evading another volley of plasma fire from Eldora's orbital defenses. His shoulder screamed where the medics had dug out the shrapnel, the region unit humming fitfully as it struggled to keep up with his stubborn refusal to stay sedated. Admiral Vosk's voice boomed through the infirmary speakers, sharp enough to override even the klaxons. "All hands, brace for warp jump." The deck plates shuddered. William's teeth rattled as the ship wrenched itself into subspace, the stars outside the viewport streaking into oblivion. Somewhere aft, a coolant line burst, spraying neon green fluid across the ceiling. Gyra materialized at his bedside, her holographic form flickering under the ship's erratic power fluctuations. She tossed a data pad onto his chest. "Tazar had backers," she said flatly. The screen lit up with dossiers, mercenary captains, disgruntled noble houses, even a rogue AI collective William had sworn they'd wiped out last decade. William groaned. "Tell me there's good news." Devon's face replaced Gyra's on the display, his grin pixelated but unmistakable. "We still have the wine cellar." William closed his eyes. Small mercies. The ship lurched again. Somewhere, something exploded. Vosk's sigh crackled over the intercom. "This is why I hate dynastic squabbles." Emperor Ayaz traced a claw along the holographic border between the old territory and the new, the map flickering under his touch. "The Iorians, Scaled, towering, their crests flared in perpetual challenge, glared back from their side of the neutral zone like a living wall. His throne room smelled of ozone and iron, the scent clinging to the tapestries that depicted Eldora's expansion in vivid thread. Behind him, the War Council waited. Admiral Vosk's cybernetic eye whirred as he calculated fleet positions. Gyra's hologram flickered, her fingers dancing through tactical projections. Even Devon had abandoned his usual smirk, his knuckles white around a datapad. The throne room's silence shattered like thin ice under Rhea's boot. She strode in without ceremony, no herald, no hovering attendants, just a datapad clutched in ink-stained fingers, and the scent of ozone clinging to her sleeves from too many hours in the comms hub. At 17, she was the only royal who still wore her hair cropped short for zero-G sabotage drills, the only one whose gloves had scorch marks from jury-rigged plasma cutters. Rhea tossed the pad onto the war table with a clack. "Governors of the bubble," she announced, her voice cutting through the holographic battle lines like a vibroblade. The pad flickered to life, displaying 10 solar systems pulsing crimson at the border, each one a self-contained theocracy, their domed cities shimmering under artificial atmospheres. Gyra's hologram leaned in, her brows knitting. "The bubble. Those fanatics can't orchestrate a lunch order without divine approval." Rhea's smirk was all sharp edges. "Exactly." Her fingers danced over the screen, pulling up intercepted sermons. Governor Orvo's rant about the corruption of interspecies trade, footage of Iorian children reciting purity mantras. They've been preaching against the new territory for years. But this. She tapped a security feed. Tazar's armor, glinting with bubble-forged alloys. "Turns out Holy War makes strange bedfellows." Devon whistled, zooming in on the alloy's molecular signature. "Bubble metallurgy. No wonder his blades cut through our shields like butter." Aya's claws flexed. "Motivation." Rhea didn't blink. "Fear. The bubble's entire power structure relies on isolation." Her boot nudged the holoprojector, sending the new territory's trade routes spiderwebbing toward the bubble's borders. "Let Eldorans dock in their ports." Next thing you know, some dockworker's kid is asking why the inferior species have better replicators. The war table hummed as Rhea's fingers danced across the holographic interface, dragging the void's scattered stations into a tight cluster around a single star. The projection flickered, recalculating orbital paths in jagged blue lines. She didn't look up as she spoke, her voice steady despite the adrenaline thrumming beneath her skin. "So," Ayaz rumbled, his claws tapping the armrest of his throne, "how do we stop them?" Rhea exhaled through her nose, her smirk sharpening. "Well," she began, zooming in on a feed of bubble citizens shuffling through temple gates, their faces slack with resignation. "According to my agents, most of the average citizens don't believe a word the governors are preaching. They just keep getting re-elected by default." Devon leaned over the table, his grin widening. "Because there's nobody to run against them." "Exactly." Rhea tapped the void's largest station, a ramshackle ring of welded hull plates labeled New Hope. "The bubble's next election is in 3 weeks. If we merge the void's colonies into one system before then..." Her fingers splayed, the stations collapsing together in the holo. 11 governors suddenly out of a job and very motivated to challenge the bubble's regime. Gyra's hologram flickered skeptically. "And how, precisely, do you propose we move 11 space stations?" Aya's grin was all teeth. "Earth moved Alpha 1, and that rust bucket makes the void stations look like shuttlecraft." The war room's holodisplay flickered as Admiral Reginald Tyler's grizzled fingers manipulated the star charts, his calloused hands moving with the precision of a man who'd spent decades navigating bureaucratic minefields. The yellow glow of C4's star system cast jagged shadows across the tactical table, highlighting the asteroid belt's mineral-rich veins like a smuggler's treasure map. "It's elegant," Rhea admitted, circling the projection. Her boots left faint scuff marks on the polished floor, one for every revolution around the data. Leave Station 9 anchored at the void's edge as a reminder. Her grin was all teeth. Let the bubble governors explain why their corrupted neighbors suddenly have tritanium-forged hydroponics. Ayaz leaned forward, his claws sinking into the armrests. The throne's ancient wood groaned. And the colonists? Reginald's chuckle was drier than C4's desert moons. Oh, they'll riot, just not at us. He tapped the belt's chromium deposits. First shipments already en route, courtesy of that misunderstanding with the Crescent freighter last month. Devon's calm pinged. He glanced at the screen and burst out laughing. Tazar's aunt just pledged her private fleet to the relocation effort. Jaira's holographic eyebrow arched. Why? Apparently, Devon wheezed, she's always hated bubble wine. The Cape Town's cockpit was a cathedral of silence. No klaxons, no screaming, just the steady thrum of warp coils vibrating through the deck plates. Illyria lounged in the pilot's chair like it was her throne, her bare feet propped on the nav console. A crystal goblet of stolen Eldoran wine dangling from her fingertips. The stars streaked past the viewport in hypnotic ribbons, the ship's autopilot humming contentedly as it chewed through the light years. She took a slow sip, savoring the vintage. 3 months. 3 blissfully uneventful months of charting potential colony sites beyond Alpha 1's jurisdiction. No sycophants begging for favors, no intercepted assassination plots, just the void, the wine, and the occasional asteroid field to dodge. The comm panel chirped, a priority ping from Ayaz, no doubt. Illyria flicked it to mute without looking. Let the boys play their little war games. She had infinitely better things to do. The barber shop's overhead fan whirred lazily, stirring the scent of aftershave and sterilized steel. Thomas wiped the clippers clean for the 12th time that hour, some nervous habit left over from Rio streets, where letting your tools get dull meant losing customers to the next alley over. The station's Earth fleet personnel had kept him busy, their regulation buzz cuts and officer-approved bobs leaving piles of dark and blonde strands across the floor. He smirked, tossing the last tuft into Jasper's collection bin. The old man had already transformed yesterday's trimmings into 3 wigs, 1 curly, 1 sleek, 1 with blue streaks for some admiral's rebellious teen. The shop's bell chimed. Thomas didn't look up. Closed for. The viewport flashed. The Orion's hope slid into dock like a knife returning to its sheath, pristine hull, polished to a mirror finish, not a scratch from its last campaign. Thomas's stomach dropped. That ship only came back clean when something worse than battle had happened. Jasper's chuckle rasped behind him. Well, there goes the neighborhood. Thomas reached for his jacket. The station's intercom stayed suspiciously silent. The rumors chased Thomas through Alpha 1's corridors like persistent ghosts, whispers of fleets massing at the void's edge, of Eldoran battlecruisers polishing their cannons for some grand colonial reshuffling. He tuned them out. His focus narrowed to the weight of the Durasteel hinges in his pocket and the mental checklist ticking behind his ribs. His quarters smelled of sawdust and synthetic pine cleaner, the 3-drawer cabinet half-assembled in the corner. He'd spent last night sanding the edges smooth, cursing when the orbital sander caught on a knot. Biraz's hypothetical clothes needed proper storage, not some flimsy prefab unit. Towels, check. Bookshelf repurposed, check. 2 bulging clothes drawers, absolutely. Thomas knelt, testing the cabinet's slide mechanism. Smooth, he exhaled through his nose. Next stop, kitchenware. Maybe one of those fancy induction burners Biraz kept eyeing at the commissary. The comm panel blinked. A priority alert from station ops, probably more void-bound traffic clogging the docks. Thomas swiped it to archive unread and reached for his toolkit. Let empires rise and fall. He had a home to build. The void's transformation unfolded like a time lapse of a blooming flower, stations locking into synchronous orbit. their docking umbilicals intertwining as smoothly as lovers' fingers. By the time the Bubbles governors scrambled their outdated patrol ships, the deed was done. 10 new colony seals stamped onto freshly minted trade agreements, each one signed by a former rival now too busy campaigning to care about holy wars. Governor Quira Vex's first act was to dismantle the rationing system. Her second, a live broadcast from New Hope's newly upgraded hydroponics bay, her laughter ringing through the comms as she bit into an actual tomato. The Bubbles citizens watched, slack-jawed, as their ex-leaders, now candidates, debated infrastructure budgets instead of divine retribution. As for Zeta Omega Two, its lone moon became a footnote in history, its hardliners reduced to shouting sermons at cargo freighters that never docked. The command chair of the Orion's Hope creaked under William's weight as he leaned back, watching Eldora Prime's marble spires glitter on the viewscreen. The scent of charred wiring and victory clung to the bridge, burnt relays from their last evasive maneuver, the sharp tang of Iorian bloodstains finally scrubbed from the deck plates. 2 days. That was all it took for Illyria's loyalists to pick the coup apart once their scaled allies fled, like watching carrion birds tear into a dying beast. A notification pinged, security footage from the throne room. William swiped it to the main screen. There was Tazar's uncle, screaming as Illyria's guards dragged him toward an airlock, his manicured claws scrabbling against the polished floor. The man who'd once sneered at William's backwater tactics, now sobbing about exile conditions on Zeta Omega 2. Devon's laughter crackled over the comms. "You hearing this? The guy who called our wine swill is begging for a crate of it before deportation." William smirked, tapping the armrest. "Tell him we'll consider it, if he admits our vintage is better." Somewhere aft, Gyra's hologram materialized just to flip off the screen. This is why monarchies are exhausting. The closet annex smelled of fresh sealant and ozone from the plasma welder. The bulkhead seemed still warm to the touch. Thomas wiped his brow with the back of his wrist, surveying his handiwork. Baraz's new workspace snug against the far wall, its durasteel surface already pockmarked from his enthusiastic drilling. The crib stood assembled in the corner, its safety rails polished to a dull gleam. He crouched to test the commode's latch again. Smooth, no sharp edges. Good. Thomas grabbed his jacket, pausing at the threshold. The posters, Earth vistas stolen from some pre-collapse archive, rippled slightly in the ventilation draft, their alpine peaks and desert sunsets almost convincing enough to fool him. Almost. The station's commissary would be packed this cycle, but diapers weren't the kind of item that flew off the shelves. He patted his pocket for the requisition Chit Jansen had grudgingly issued. "Annexation complete," he muttered to the empty room. The door hissed shut behind him. The autopilot's disengagement chime was still echoing through the Cape Town's cockpit when the viewscreen lit up with tactical overlays. 6 planets locked in impossible orbit. Their gravity wells somehow stable enough to avoid tearing each other apart. Alice's fingers flew across the nav console, scanning for anomalies, but the real shock came 3 seconds later when the warships decloaked. 3 angular monstrosities with hulls that rippled, shifting between matte black and reflective silver like living metal. She slammed her fist on the comm panel. "Birah, get your scaly ass up here now." The alien transmission crackled through before Birah could respond, a voice like gravel dragged through an ion storm. "Alien vessel, you will proceed to the royal seat, or you will be vaporized." Coordinates pinged onto the nav screen, a spiked station orbiting the gas giant, its silhouette bristling with weapon emplacements. Alice's synthetic lungs hissed. "Fantastic! Just once I'd like to jump into a system that doesn't have a standing shoot first policy." Her fingers danced over the helm, inputting the course with deliberate slowness, buying time. The Cape Town's engines groaned in protest as she nudged them toward the station at a crawl. Somewhere aft, boots pounded against the deck plates, Baraz's voice, razor-edged with sleep deprivation. You better be joking about the vaporized part. Alice didn't look up. Oh, I wish. The throne room's climate controls hissed as they fought against new Zarmer's perpetual humidity. The scent of ozone and recycled sweat clinging to the banners that draped the obsidian walls. Dizzle had just finished signing off on the new algae quotas, another damn band-aid for their starving colonies, when the alert pinged. Her stylus snapped in half. An alien ship. She flung the broken pieces at the holographic projection of their system, the shattered plastic scattering across the tactical display. In our space. Her advisor flinched. Approaching the royal seat now, Your Majesty, their tech signature is unfamiliar. Dizzle's knuckles cracked as she clenched her fists. 7 billion mouths to feed, one crumbling biosphere. And now this. She strode to the viewport where new Zarmer's sickly yellow atmosphere churned beneath the orbital docks. Bring them in, she growled. But if they so much twitch wrong. Her smile was all teeth. Vaporize them slowly. The docking clamps hissed as they secured the Cape Town, the metallic groan echoing through the hull like an unwelcome guest. Illyria lounged in the pilot's chair, her booted feet still propped on the nav console, swirling the dregs of her wine. Baraz leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You're literally the only queen on board. Protocol says. I know what protocol says, Illyria snapped, downing the last of her drink. But if you think I'm wearing a crown to greet whatever gun-happy lunatics run this place, you've clearly never met me. Baraz smirked, so no pressure. Illyria stood, smoothing her rumpled flight suit with exaggerated dignity. None whatsoever. Just a leisurely chat with potential hostiles while you lot hide behind me. She paused at the airlock, flashing a razor-edged grin. Try not to vomit if they are ugly. The hatch hissed open before Baraz could retort. System, name equals Dizzle. The throne room's atmospheric processors whined under the sudden influx of alien pheromones, floral, musky, sharp with adrenaline as 12 figures crossed the threshold. Dizzle's pulse spiked. All female, all armed. All moving with the synchronized wariness of predators in unfamiliar territory. Her claws dug into the throne's armrests when she spotted the pink one. The Zarmer. But wrong. Wrong. Too soft in the jaw, too rounded at the crest, like some artist's crude imitation of her people. Ymel's breath tickled her ear, his whisper barely audible over the guard's shifting boots. I think I've seen this movie. They all get eaten in the third act. Dizzle barely registered her own growl of not helping, because then she saw her. The AI, old Zarmer's plating gleamed under the harsh throne room lights, every seam and joint perfect in its construction, untouched by time or rust. The dead world's last daughter stood there, alive, breathing, her photoreceptors locking onto Dizzle's with eerie precision. The scent of ozone burned Dizzle's nostrils. She realized, distantly, that she'd stopped breathing. Illyria's fingers tightened around her empty wineglass as she took in the throne room, the towering blue figures, the crests that mirrored Eldoran physiology, but with a dozen subtle differences, like a sculptor had copied her people from half-remembered sketches. Then her gaze landed on the queen. The way Dizzle stared at Alice, not with suspicion, but with something raw, almost wounded. The realization hit Illyria like a plasma round to the ribs. 15 years ago, the Cape Town had stumbled upon ruins in the Theta Delta system, scans of Zarmer glyphs beneath the dust, proof their exodus wasn't annihilation. She'd buried the data, assuming the trail was cold. Now she was staring at the answer, alive and seething, in a throne room that smelled of algae and desperation. Illyria set her glass down with deliberate calm. Well, she drawled, flicking a speck of imaginary dust from her sleeve. This explains why your wine is terrible. Dizzle's claws flexed. You are delighted to finally meet the neighbors, Illyria finished, sweeping into a bow so shallow it bordered on insult. Though I'd have brought a housewarming gift if I'd known you'd lost the recipe for a decent Merlot. Barat choked. Alice's optics flickered to emergency red. Illyria grinned. Let the aliens vaporize her. This was worth it. The data pad slipped from Dizzle's fingers, clattering against the obsidian floor. 20% to 47. The numbers burned behind her eyelids like a brand. 7 generations of exiles scraping survival from asteroid algae. 7 generations of children born under artificial suns, while humans had turned their corpse of a world green. Her throne room smelled suddenly cloying, the recycled air thick with the musk of stunned advisors. The holographic projection still flickered between her feet, satellite feeds of Zarmer's northern continent, now dotted with unfamiliar domes where the reactor sites once bled poison into the watersheds. Ymel's claws tapped hesitantly against her shoulder. "Your Majesty." Dizzle's roar shook the chandeliers. "Silence." She surged forward, scattering the holograms with a sweep of her tail. The humans had filters. They had terraforming rigs. They'd walked into her ancestors' graveyard and treated it like a renovation project. The holoprojector flickered between them, casting jagged shadows across Dizzle's clenched fists. 47% survivability. 7 billion mouths. 1 poisoned homeworld reborn under alien hands. The humans' offer pulsed at the edge of the display, their sleek orbital renderings of Moon 3-3 superimposed over Zarmer's skeletal reactors like a surgeon's overlay. She exhaled through her nose, tasting the metallic tang of the throne room's overworked air scrubbers. "Your terms," she said, her voice scraping like hull plating, "are acceptable." Ymel's claws dug into her shoulder. "Your Majesty." Silence. Dizzle didn't blink as Illyria's smirk widened. Let the Eldoran Queen relish the moment. The hologram zoomed in on Moon 3-3 pockmarked surface, lifeless, airless, perfect. "But the terraforming schematics come first," her claws flexed. "And if your engineers so much as sneeze near our algae vats." Alice's optics flickered amber. "We'll bring our own tissues." Dizzle leaned back, the throne's ancient hydraulics hissing beneath her. 7 generations of ration bars, 7 generations of children who'd never tasted fruit that wasn't synth paste. Her sigh fogged the projection. The station-wide alert pinged 3 times, standard docking procedure. But Thomas was already moving before the automated voice finished announcing the Cape Town's arrival. His boots skidded against the polished deck plates as he rounded the final corridor, the framed contract bouncing against his hip where he'd tucked it under his jacket. The airlock hissed open just as he reached the gangway. Barat emerged first, her crest flattened with exhaustion, her scales dull under the artificial lighting. Thomas didn't let her speak. He caught her face in his hands and kissed her hard enough to taste the stale ship's air on her lips. Someone, probably Alice, Wolf whistled from the hatchway. When he finally pulled back, Barat blinked at him, her pupils dilated. "What the hell?" Thomas jerked his chin toward the contract in his grip, its green-edged parchment now encased in durasteel framing. "Wanted you to see it first thing." His thumb brushed the lower corner where their signatures overlapped, his blocky and deliberate, hers a sharp slash of ink. "No glass." Didn't want it feeling like a prison. Barat stared at the document. Her claws flexed once, twice. Then she grabbed his collar and yanked him into another kiss. Thomas's hand stayed warm over her eyelids, even as the door hissed open. An unnecessary precaution given her thermal vision could have mapped the room through his fingers. But then the scent hit her. Fresh polymer sealant, ozone from a recent plasma weld, and underneath it all, cedar. Actual earth cedar. Her crest flared when his palms dropped away. The annex wasn't just overhauled, it was transformed. Her medical texts lined the new shelves in precise order, the crib's safety rails gleamed with fresh polish, and the workstation. Gods, he'd replicated her old clinic's layout down to the specimen drawer placements. Barat opened her mouth, closed it. "Nice," she managed, the word criminally inadequate, her claws flexed against his jacket. "Thoughtful." Then she kissed him, Not the teasing nips from the ship, but deep and slow, her tail curling possessively around his thigh. When she finally pulled back, her voice dropped to a growl. "Now let's go make that baby before I tear this very thoughtful setup apart with my teeth." The door hissed shut behind her, sealing away the Cape Town's recycled air with a sigh of hydraulics. Illyria's fingers had barely begun unfastening her flight suit when the scent hit her, spiced leather and gun oil, unmistakable even after 3 months. William lounged across her temporary bunk like he owned it, his boots propped on her pillow, the ship's emergency lighting catching the new scar along his jaw. His grin was a blade in the dimness. Empire's stable. Gyra won't stop whining about dynastic succession. Illyria arched a brow, letting the suit's top half pool at her waist. And Devon. Bet me 50 credits you'd punch me for suggesting twins. She stalked forward, her nails scraping the bunk's alloy frame. You've gained weight. William's laugh was rough as he caught her wrist. Muscle lost the gut-dodging bubble fanatics. His thumb traced her pulse point. Your ride's not due for 36 hours. Illyria sank onto him with a purr. Then you'd better be exhausted by dawn. The bar stool creaked under Yua's weight as she slumped forward, her forehead hitting the polished counter with a dull thunk. Around her, the neon glow of Alpha One's seediest dive bar reflected in 3 equally miserable faces. Yume nursing her 3rd sake bomb, Yvette glaring into a virgin mojito ship's rules, and Yenna attempting to drown herself in cheap tequila. Yua gestured blindly for the bartender. Double whiskey. No ice, and keep him coming until one of us finds a man who doesn't suck. Yvette snorted, at least you have a ship. Yenna lifted her head just enough to slur. That's a girl, so that's no good, before face-planting back into her arms. Yume slammed her empty glass down hard enough to crack the base. I need more booze. The bartender, a grizzled ex-marine with a cybernetic eye, sighed and slid the entire bottle down the counter. Ladies, at this rate, you're gonna outdrink your problems before sunrise. Yua grabbed the whiskey with both hands. That's the plan. The table rattled as Zara slammed her empty tankard down hard enough to make the other glasses jump. Her tusks glinted under the bar's flickering neon as she scowled across at the miserable cluster of Whiteicus still drowning themselves at the counter. Bullshit odds, she growled, gesturing wildly toward Alice's untouched synth beverage. 12 women on this station worth a damn, and 2 functional relationships. Her thick finger jabbed at Chloe's half-finished cocktail. You had a guy lined up until he turned out to be smuggling void beetles in his pants. Amara snorted into her cider. Technically, Thomas counts as 3 relationships if you factor in the contractual. Don't, Alice groaned, burying her face in her hands. The servos in her fingers whined. I don't want to think about Baraz. The bartender's cybernetic eye word as he slid a bubbling beaker toward Alice. Try this. Ethanol-laced coolant with a dash of synthetic dopamine. Tastes like regret, but should fry your logic circuits for 20 minutes. Zara grinned as Alice hesitantly took a sip, then spasmed, optics flashing emergency yellow. Now we're talking. The bar's door slid open with a pneumatic wheeze, releasing a concentrated wave of synth alcohol fumes and despair into the corridor. Dizzle's nostrils flared, some unholy cocktail of fermented grain, citrus, and the acrid tang of overheating servos. Her boots stuck slightly to the floor as she crossed the threshold. 4 figures were slumped at the counter in various states of undoing. One human face down in a puddle of something neon green, another muttering into a shattered glass, the orc halfway through demolishing a bar stool with her bare hands. And then there was Alice, the AI, clutching a beaker of smoking liquid with her optics flickering between error codes and what looked suspiciously like laughter. Ymel, trailing behind her, gagged. Are they dying? Dizzle smirked, elbowing past a groaning Yua to claim the only intact stool. Nah, just Tuesday. She snatched Alice's drink mid-spasm and took a swig. The coolant burned like a plasma torch down her throat. The bartender's cybernetic eye whirred in recognition. "Your Majesty." He slid a tumbler of something amber across the counter without being asked. "Here for the cargo manifests." Dizzle knocked back the whiskey in one go. "Here to see if your station's as pathetic as your diplomats implied." Her claw tapped the empty glass toward Alice's twitching form. "Turns out, you exceed expectations." Somewhere to her left, Hume groaned into the countertop. "Why are queens always like this?" Dizzle's grin widened. Some things were universal. The Cape Town's medbay scanner beeped for the 17th time in confirmation. Its holographic readout pulsing the same damning glyphs over Baraz's abdomen. She stared at the projection. Tiny, clawless fingers curled in repose, while Thomas's choked laugh vibrated against her shoulder where he'd buried his face. The scent of sterilizer and his stupid earth aftershave mingled with the static buzz of the machine. Across the station, Illyria reclined on a divan of Eldoran silk, Gyra's delighted shrieks still ringing in her ears as the palace physician's final scan faded from the wall screen. Devon's whoop had nearly shattered the crystal decanter in her grip. And in Alpha, one's converted docking bay, now Thomas's thriving salon, the steady snip-snip of scissors faltered as another shipment of Zarmer terraforming modules rumbled past the viewports. The stylist's chair spun under his absent-minded push, his fingers lingering on the client's shoulders just a second too long. The station hummed with activity, its corridors swollen with engineers and diplomats, its air thick with the scent of ozone and anticipation. On New Zarmer, the first atmospheric processor flared to life in a corona of blue fire, its vents exhaling the first breath of clean air in 7 generations. The medbay's overhead lights stuttered as Baraz's claws carved fresh gouges into the exam table's alloy frame. Her entire body was one pulsating knot of agony, every muscle locked in rebellion. "Fuck you." She snarled, her voice raw from 17 hours of curses, her crest flaring violently as another contraction ripped through her. "This was your idea, you, sand-skulled bastard." Chloe's forearm pressed into her collarbones, holding her down with the casual ease of someone who'd wrangled void beetle smugglers. "Breathe, you scaly lunatic. Your kid's gonna be real disappointed if its first memory is watching mommy get tased by station security." Baraz's howl dissolved into panting. The pain crested then, impossibly shifted. Pressure. Purpose. Amara's hands moved with practiced precision between her thighs. One more push. Baraz's vision whited out. When it cleared, a squirming bundle lay on her chest, tiny, perfect, its miniature crest still slick with amniotic fluid. Mary's first cry was a reedy, indignant wail that shook the sterile air. Baraz's claws trembled as she traced the curve of her daughter's cheek. All the rage, the fear, the months of bristling at Thomas's stupidly gentle hands, none of it mattered now. Mary's fingers curled around Baraz's scaled thumb. Chloe smirked. "Told you you'd melt." Baraz didn't even glare. The infirmary doors burst open with a clatter, the overhead lights flickering under the force of Illyria's snarl. Her silk gown was drenched in sweat, clinging to her heaving chest as she lunged at William with bared teeth. "Let me kill him." Her fingers flexed like talons, inches from his throat. "Just once, let me squeeze until his eyes and NGH. Pop." Yvette's arms locked around Illyria's waist, her boots skidding against the polished floor. "For Void's sake, hold still," she grunted, barely dodging a wild elbow to the ribs. Yenna didn't look up from between Illyria's thighs, her hands steady despite the chaos. "Yua, a little help." Yua vaulted over a supply cart, catching Illyria's thrashing shoulders mid-lunge. "Easy, Your Majesty, unless you want to birth this kid standing up." Then the contraction hit. Illyria's scream shattered a ceiling panel. The world narrowed to white-hot agony, her nails carving furrows into Yua's forearms. Just as suddenly, the pain vanished, replaced by a squalling, writhing weight on her belly. Yenna wiped the infant's face with a towel, her smirk audible. "Congratulations, it's a boy." Illyria's breath caught. Michael's tiny fingers flailed against her skin, his crest, William's crest, still damp and downy. Her fury dissolved like sugar in water. William dared to lean in, his chuckle warm against her temple. "Told you'd." Illyria kissed him silent, her thumb brushing Michael's cheek. "Perfect." The royal seat's reinforced viewport thrummed under Dizzle's claws as she watched the last atmospheric rig lock into orbit, its silver hull reflecting New Zarmer's sickly yellow sky like a promise. 15 years. 15 years of algae vats not failing, of children not choking on recycled air, of her people not scraping survival from asteroid mines while their bones grew brittle. Behind her, the Science Council's holograms flickered, 3 barren moons pulsing with projected biospheres, their trajectories interlacing like dancers. Ymel's breath hitched as the simulation stabilized. 3 habitable satellites within a decade, even if the oxygen scrubbers. Dizzle silenced him with a raised hand, her grin sharp enough to draw blood. "Tell the old fossils on the high bench their pet projects approved." She turned back to the stars, where Earth's freighters still gleamed like distant teeth. "And send the humans another crate of that synth Merlot they pretend to enjoy." The council scrambled to obey. Dizzle exhaled, watching her breath fog the glass. 15 years to find a real solution. 15 years to stop being refugees in their own dam system. Her reflection smirked back at her. Time to earn that throne. The end.